Shit. I'll never break through that ice. Page from her journal.
Mother's crying in the next room. She says it's because she's happy, but I don't believe her. My father is getting out of prison. My friends protest the unlawful imprisonments, but I wish they'd kept Michael O'Shea locked up forever. Life in prison isn't long enough for him. It would kill my mother if she ever read this. What if Michael ever read it? Would it kill him? Or would he kill me? Well, the violence didn't stop when he was on the inside, but at least when I read about something terrible in the paper, I knew my father wasn't the cause. But now, God help us all. Stanley took me to this lovely old tree on the cliffs overlooking the sea. It was just the perfect spot. Then I saw there were notches carved into the trunk. I pointed them out to him and asked him how many other girls had he brought here. Stanley laughed and said when he was just a lad, he and his dad would come to the same spot for picnics, and Paddy would notch the tree to show how much Stanley had grown. I turned as red as a beetroot and muttered some kind of apology. When we sat down to eat lunch, I saw another notch at the base of the tree. When I asked him what that one was for, he winked and said, Margaret Kane. The summers in Munich are beautiful. The palazzas are full of tourists, so Stanley and I blend right in. But even in the sea of anonymous faces, we have to be careful. Today, I was sitting in the park with my lunch when this young man with a big fancy camera came up to me. He was handsome and stylish, a real artsy type, and he asked if he could take some photos of me. Obviously, I had to say no. But then he said something that caught me off guard. He said that my eyes were the saddest he'd ever seen. Of course they are, I said. I'm Irish. I left everything on the bench and disappeared into the crowd.
thin ice. I've got to be careful.
Mother begged me not to go, but I assured her it was a peaceful rally. Molly wouldn't go with me, she was afraid the army would show up. So I dragged Stanley with me. I thought for sure he'd want to be there, because his father was one of the speakers. Paddy Whitaker was an electrifying presence. People were cheering and clapping as he spoke about the end to the violence, a peaceful end to the troubles. He spoke with such conviction, I nearly wept. When I looked over at Stanley, he was wearing fucking headphones and messing with his cassette player. He said he'd heard it all before. I couldn't believe it. He has no idea how lucky he is.
First the shelter, now this lock. I've got to find a way through. Believe it. Those numbers from the journal. This makes no sense. Still alive. get warm. Got to get warm. Oh, this valve. Maybe. That's good. Oh, thank God.
I don't know what's wrong with that man. Stanley came into Rory's pub tonight, sweaty and out of breath. His eye was swollen, his lip was bleeding, and he looked as proud as a peacock. He and one of his no-good mates went messing into East Belfast to stir up trouble. Stanley had the brilliant idea to spray the Story Plough over a Unionist mural, but they got caught by some locals and they got into a scrap. Rory thought that was a gas and bought Stanley a pint. I told Stanley he was an idiot. What if he'd been caught by the guard or the UVF? They'd have bloody killed him. But he was just too proud of himself to listen.
Is this another bunker? How many are there? You've got to be kidding me. Everything's frozen. And I'm running out of time.
Face hurts from trying to smile all night. I can't blame Stanley. There's no way he could have known. He's not that cruel. He knew I was named after Beethoven's opera and just assumed that I'd be a fan. But it was my father who loved the opera. He'd blast those records into the night and stagger about with a half-empty bottle, waving it in time with the music. It was terrifying. But I loved Stanley. So I gripped his hand and smiled through the entire performance.
These pipes, they must all be connected.
Stanley, are you there? Oh, it's so cold. I can't stop shivering. My leg is going numb. At least it doesn't hurt anymore. I might have fallen asleep. Oh, I thought I heard voices. I don't remember what time it is. I think it'll be dark soon. I don't think I'll make it through the night. Stanley, you've got to stay warm.
Oh, God. Hypothermia must be setting in. Oh, shit! Hail! Ah! Hail's too strong. I can't get through.
Molly and I snuck out to a party tonight. It was in full swing by the time we got there, meaning all the boys were bollocksed. Well, not all. We weren't there long when this beautiful lad hands me a beer and said his name was Colin. I was tall with bright green eyes and he wore neon-coloured runners. I asked him if it was his party. He shook his head and said that he knew it was my party. Then he turned and waved his hand around like he was the great fucking Gatsby. And the first thing we saw was Stanley Whittaker throwing up in the kitchen sink. I laughed and said he could have his party back. Oh, we blathered for a while and we were really getting on when Stanley Whittaker stumbled over and asked Colin if he ever wore those shoes outside. And before I could tell him to fuck off, Stanley asked Colin if he knew I was the daughter of Michael O'Shea. I felt my legs go numb. Colin couldn't get away from me fast enough.
This thing. Christ, I hope it's big enough to protect me. The door. It's working. Kiss my arse. Fucking island. The black smoke. Nearly there. Oh no! Oh Christ, what the? Oh fuck! Help!